We are back with Adam Johnson at the Strategas Global Macro Conference right here in New York. He is sitting down with none other than Dan Clifton, a partner at Strategas and the head of the firm's Washington office. Adam, all yours.
Hey, thanks, Carol. Well, as a head of the Washington office, Dan, you're kind of the Washington guru. You help us read the tea leaves, understand what's happening in Washington, what it means for markets. So what are the three themes that, or four if there are, that investors are talking about?
Well, investors at our conference have been really talking about three key issues out of Washington. First, economic growth. For President Obama, his re-election is going to be tied to economic growth. They're talking about what is the government doing for jobs. But at the same time, what are we doing to bring in the deficit? And talking about entitlement reform, making long-term changes to the budget. We have a number of catalysts coming up in Congress in the next month. How will those issues be resolved? And then third, given what's going on in Japan and as well as the Middle East, what is going to be the future of energy policy here in the U.S.? There's always been this talk about energy independence. Is this going to be the time we actually do something? And so it's provided a very lively conversation at the conference today.
Well, that's a big one. We've got all this natural gas, perhaps 10 times as much nat gas as Saudi Arabia has oil, and the call for using that nat gas to maybe power government vehicles, buses, et cetera.
Cars, I would say that natural gas was never really treated with proper respect in Washington, D.C., but given that we're relying upon foreign oil, given that it's so plentiful here, we want American jobs, I think natural gas is becoming a much larger part of the conversation, particularly using it to power vehicles, whether it's going to be powering trucks or powering government vehicles. That's going to be part of a larger conversation in the second half of 2011.
And what's the tone here amongst all the guys, 400 or 500 investors? Do they feel Washington is going to keep being accommodative?
Yeah, well, I think that's a very good question. We've done a lot of stimulus over the last couple of years. There's a big, what we call fiscal drag coming at the end of the year, payroll tax expiring. But again, the president's going to want to get reelected. If the economy is not moving in the right direction, the policymakers will continue to be stimulative. I would also say we're talking about QE3 today. Is there going to be a QE3? At the very least, if QE2 expires, it's not going to be just over, and QE3 or the potential for QE3 will still be in the market for some time. If need be, that Bernanke put will stay in the market and remain accommodative.
Okay, we had Lee Cooperman on earlier. He had a whole lot to tell us. Listen to part of it.
Okay.
When an economic expansion gets going in the post-war period, the average economic expansions last about 5 years. We're only a year and a half into a new economic expansion, so I think we're relatively early on in a new cycle. And I think all this argues reasonably well for the equity market, particularly given valuations.
So does Washington need to apply more at this point, or will the market just take over?
Well, I think the key metric is to watch is jobs. We had a very good jobs report last month. If we're going to go do 200,000 jobs a month over the next 6 months, I think policy will start getting removed. If we don't see that and jobs remain sluggish, then policy is going to remain accommodative. The key is not only to get 1 year growth or 2 year growth, but it's to get that long self-sustaining business cycle. I think that's the goal of policymakers, and they'll do anything for growth as inflation is less of a concern at this point.
And what we're hearing is inflation isn't coming from commodities. It comes more from wages, that wage price spiral, and we don't have that right now.
Well, that's correct. I mean, you need to have a strong job growth to start getting wage inflation. But I would also say that be careful, because as the price of commodities go up, workers are going to start demanding more in their wages to pay for those higher level of commodities, or businesses can make a decision not to keep those employees on board, which is exactly what they did in 2007 and 2008, which is why policy is probably going to remain much more accommodative.
Now, talk about a change in policy. Obama coming out of the elections, very different tone, moving towards the center.
That's right. Hey, look, every politician wants a win, and Barack Obama not only cut a deal to extend the Bush tax cuts that he opposed right after the election, he added 2 new tax cuts in there, a payroll tax cut and allowing businesses to fully expense. We're also talking about trade agreements and preventing regulations from going in place that may inhibit manufacturing sector growth. So the key here is Barack Obama is going to go for growth to ensure his presidential reelection, and if they don't see that growth, they'll step in and do more.
You think he lowers the tax cuts or extends the tax cuts again?
Well, I think he's going to be faced with that. You ask any of our clients, they say, no, we're probably not going to do another extension of the payroll tax cut at the end of 2011. If I was a betting man, I would say that payroll tax cut's going to get extended into 2012.
All right, Carol, Matt, you heard it here first from Dan Clifton. This is the Strategas Global Conference.